Okay, turn to Proverbs 11:17. Proverbs 11:17 says, "The merciful man doeth good to his own soul, but he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh." Let's look at that first part and define the terms. The merciful man doeth good to his own soul. A merciful man is one having or exercising mercy, characterized by mercy. Mercy is forbearance and compassion shown by one person to another who is in his power and who has no claim to receive kindness, kind and compassionate treatment in a case where severity is merited or expected. It says, "The merciful man doeth good." Good is that which is good. It is, in the widest sense, good, whatever is good in itself or beneficial in effect. The phrase "to do good," which is how it's used here, essentially, he doeth good to his own soul. To do good is to act rightly, fulfill the moral law, to show kindness, to employ oneself in philanthropic work. That would be like charitable work. To improve the condition of, be beneficial to. And then it says he does good to his own soul. And the soul is the principle of life in man or animals, animate existence. It's the principle of thought and action in man, commonly regarded as an entity distinct from the body, the spiritual part of man in contrast to the purely physical. So in other words, if we put the definitions in the verse, the man who is characterized by mercy and therefore shows forbearance and kind and compassionate treatment to himself and others when severity is merited, he acts rightly in fulfillment of God's law toward, shows kindness to, and improves the condition of his own spiritual inward man. Or in other words, the merciful man doeth good to his own soul. You could put it that way too, in less words. So let's look at how this is that the merciful man doeth good to his own soul. Because typically when we think of mercy, we think of mercy being showed to somebody else. So you think of a merciful man doing good to other people that he shows mercy to. But here it says he does good to his own soul. And he essentially does good to his own soul indirectly by doing good to other people. Because doing good to other people ends up benefiting himself and his own soul. It says in 2 Samuel 22:26 that a merciful man will obtain mercy from God, and then in Matthew 5:7 he'll obtain mercy from others, and therefore he indirectly does good to his own soul by showing mercy. So let's look at those two verses. 2 Samuel 22:26. So if you show mercy, you get mercy from God and from other men. And when you do that, you've just done good to your own soul. 2 Samuel 22 and verse 26 says, "With the merciful thou wilt show thyself merciful, and with the upright man thou wilt show thyself upright. With the pure thou wilt show thyself pure, and with the froward thou wilt show thyself unsavory." And this is speaking of the Lord. So the Lord will show himself merciful to those who show mercy. And so will men. Men likewise will show mercy to people who are merciful. If you think about it, if somebody could have been harsh and judged you and decided to show mercy, chances are, if the tables turn one day, hopefully you'd remember and show mercy to that man. Now, there will be an example in the Bible of somebody that didn't do that. We'll look at that here in a second. But if you're a betting man, you can probably bet if you showed mercy to somebody else, chances are they would probably show mercy to you. Matthew 5 and verse 7. Matthew 5:7. It says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Now, of course, that could be obtaining mercy from God or obtaining mercy from other men, both. Now, a merciful man also accrues blessings in his life, and there's at least two reasons or two ways in which he would accrue these blessings, and these blessings, of course, would be good for his own soul. The first way is that the man who shows mercy shall find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. So when he shows mercy, then he gets favor from God and understanding from God, and both of those things are good things, and both of those things would be of a spiritual nature. So he's doing good to his own soul by showing mercy. Let's look at that in Proverbs 3:3-4. It says, "Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thine heart." So, apparently, just from this verse, it must be pretty easy for mercy and truth to slip away from us. Because he says to bind it about our necks, to write it upon the table of our hearts. So that just tells me that, sometimes the truth is hard to hold on to or hard to find. And it's easier to be judgmental than mercy. So you got to bind them upon you so they don't get away. Verse 4, "So, if you do that, so shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man." So here's the spiritual blessings that accrue to the man that shows mercy. Favor with God and good understanding from God. Both blessings of the soul. So the merciful man doeth good to his own soul, indirectly. And then he that follows after righteousness and mercy finds life, righteousness, and honor, we're told in Proverbs 21 and verse 21. "He that followeth after righteousness and mercy findeth life, righteousness, and honor." Once again, spiritual blessings. He does good to his soul by showing mercy to others. So a merciful man therefore benefits himself and thus does good to his own soul. Now, we probably don't think about mercy in this aspect often, but a merciful man also shows mercy to himself, because just like we can be harsh and judgmental towards others, we can be the same way towards ourselves. And sometimes we need to show ourselves mercy. Sometimes, I know with myself, the person that I'm the hardest on is myself. If I called other people the names that I call myself, I wouldn't have any friends. That's for sure. If you think about it, like when I do something, I'm like, "You idiot!" Like, I wouldn't say that to somebody else, right, that did the same thing. But when I do it, it makes them mess up on whatever I'm working on or something. So we could all stand to show ourselves probably a little more mercy than we do sometimes. Now, this is not to say that we should treat our sin in our life lightly, right? So when I say have mercy on yourself, I don't mean to say, well, yeah, I just sinned, but it's not such a big deal, right? That's not what I'm talking about. So the man that shows mercy to himself doesn't treat his sin lightly, but he also does not condemn himself as a reprobate every time he sins and tells himself that he doesn't love God and God doesn't love him. Right? So there's a difference between sinning and saying that was wrong, confessing that, feeling bad for it, and sinning and saying you're just an evil, wicked reprobate. You're not even a child of God. You don't love God, or you wouldn't have done that, and God doesn't love you, right? That would be an unmerciful attitude towards oneself, and you don't want to do that, because God doesn't treat you like that. So why would you treat yourself like that?
Sounds like Satan planting a thought.
That's exactly what it is. Just like he said to Jesus, "If thou be the Son of God," right? And he does that with us too. Oh, if you were a child of God, you wouldn't have thought that, you wouldn't have said that, you wouldn't have done that. The merciful man reminds himself of God's mercy and is therefore merciful to himself. And in this, he does good to his own soul. So there's another way that the merciful man does good to his own soul. And then in another way, a merciful man does good to his own soul by lending or giving to others in need. Psalm 37 and verse 26. And when he does this, he'll be blessed by the Lord. And I'll get to that verse in a second. And he'll do good to his own soul, once again, in an indirect manner. Psalm 37 and verse 26. It says, "He is ever merciful and lendeth, and his seed is blessed." So here, being merciful and lending to those in need. are clearly tied together. And when we do that, God will in turn repay us for what we've lent to others, especially if the person you lend to can't pay you back. And, of course, in the world, you don't lend money to people that can't pay you back. But Christians will lend money to people that can't pay you back. As a matter of fact, we're commanded to loan money to people that can't pay us back. Jesus told us to lend and hope we don't get paid back. Right? Now that's contrary to everything, that you think about when you're talking about economics, but according to Christ, you lend hoping to receive nothing again, and then you'll be blessed. So anytime you loan money to somebody that's in need, I would just recommend assuming that you don't get it back, not planning or asking to get it back. And if you do, it's okay, but just consider it a charitable gift. Proverbs 19 and verse 17. He that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. So you think you're giving to the poor, lending to the poor, but who you're actually lending to is the Lord. It's the Lord is the surety. Think about it that way. The Lord can do that, right? He's got infinite resources. So when you give a loan to the poor, the Lord is really the cosigner there, and then the Lord pays it back when that guy can't. You think about it that way. And the man that does this, that has mercy on the poor, he is blessed. Proverbs 14 and verse 21. Proverbs 14:21. He that despiseth his neighbor sinneth, but he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he, or happy is a synonym for blessed. So by being merciful, by lending or giving to the poor, the merciful man therefore indirectly does good to his own soul. He lends to the poor, and the Lord pays him back. He just did good to himself, right? No, the merciful man also doesn't do it for that reason. It happens, but he doesn't think, you know what? I know how I can make some money. I'm going to give to this poor guy, and then the Lord's going to somehow give it back to me plus interest. You don't think about it that way, obviously. But if you're doing it selflessly like you should, it'll come around, and you'll end up doing good to your own soul. But he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh, the second part of the verse. Cruel, when you're speaking of persons, is disposed to inflict suffering, indifferent to or taking pleasure in another's pain or distress, destitute of kindness or compassion, merciless, pitiless, hard-hearted. Somebody you want to stay away from. That's a sordid, terrible description of a human being. Unfortunately, there are people like that out there that walk among us. Thankfully, there's not that many of them. At least I haven't met that many of them, thankfully. But if it weren't for the grace of God and the restraining hand of God, there'd be a lot more of that. People like that trouble their own flesh. Trouble is to disturb, agitate, ruffle, like water or air, etc. To stir up water is to make it thick or muddy. To make wine thick by stirring up the lees, it's like the sediment at the bottom of it. To make turbid, dim, or cloudy. So that's the primary definition of trouble. Like when it says, does it say in John chapter 5 that the waters were troubled? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he waited for the troubling of the water. The first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole. Yeah, so there's an example of that definition there. But secondly, it is to disturb, derange, to interfere with, interrupt, to hinder, mar. It's also to put into a state of mental agitation or disquiet, to disturb, distress, grieve, perplex. And it's also to do harm or hurt to injure, to molest, oppress. And flesh is the animal or physical nature of man, human nature as subject, corporeal necessities, human nature as subject There's probably a typo there. I don't think that sounds right. The animal or physical nature of man, human nature as subject, corporeal necessities and limitations. Probably subject to corporeal necessities and limitations, I would think. So, in other words, if we put the definitions in, the man who is disposed to inflict suffering, is indifferent to or takes pleasure in another's pain or distress, is destitute of kindness or compassion, and is merciless, pitiless, and hard-hearted, that man agitates, disquiets, disturbs, distresses, grieves, perplexes, harms, hurts, injures, molests, and oppresses his own self, including his physical body. Just like the merciful man does good to his soul, the cruel man, which is the opposite of mercy, does evil to his own self, to his own flesh. Those who are cruel show no mercy. Let me just show you this. I mean, the definitions obviously bear that out, but the Bible does too. In Jeremiah 6 and verse 23, this can come as a result of natural consequences. Like you're really nasty and mean to other people, and then somebody gets their chance and puts a beating on you, like we were just talking about. Or it can come about with divine providence, how God sees how you act, and then he troubles your flesh. So it can come about either way, naturally or supernaturally. Jeremiah 6 and verse 23. Jeremiah 6:23. They shall lay hold on bow and spear. They are cruel and have no mercy. Their voice roareth like the sea, and they ride upon horses set in array as men of war against thee, O daughter of Zion. They are cruel and have no mercy. So we see these are antonyms. And those who are cruel will be punished severely by God and therefore bring trouble upon their own flesh. This was what happened to Israel after they were judged for their sin that went on for so long, and the Lord finally destroyed them with the Babylonians. And here Jeremiah is lamenting about what happened to them. And in Lamentations 4, 3 through 6, it says, Lamentations 4, 3 through 6, even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones. The daughter of my people has become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. Now, in Job, it tells us that the ostriches are so stupid that they bury their eggs in the earth and then forget where they put them, and they step on them and crush their own eggs. They're that stupid. And he says, my people's become cruel like the ostriches in the wilderness. And they did, in fulfillment of prophecy. The women ate their own children. Right? They were like the ostrich. And we do this with, people do this with abortion to this day. Right, that don't have natural affection for their children. The tongue of the sucking child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask bread, and no man breaketh it unto them. They that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. Things can turn around pretty quickly. People that were wealthy are now lying on a big pile of manure. For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom, that was overthrown as in a moment, and no hands stayed on her. These people will become cruel, and look, the punishment from God comes even worse than it came on Sodom. So the man that's cruel will end up troubling his own flesh because of the judgment of God against him. It says in James 2:13 that we will have judgment without mercy if we show no mercy. James 2:13. And this would be the definition of cruelty, or at least maybe a mild version of it. James 2:13 says, for he shall have judgment without mercy that has showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. So if we show no mercy and are cruel, then we will have judgment and not be shown mercy. We'll trouble our own flesh. And now let's get to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this study, and that's in Matthew 18. This is an example of somebody that you would think would have been merciful, somebody that had received great mercy and yet was unmerciful in a lesser matter than was shown mercy to him. So he was shown mercy, he was shown greater mercy, and he wouldn't even show lesser mercy to somebody else, and he ended up being judged severely for it. Matthew 18:23 through 35. This is a parable. Jesus says, "Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife, and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. And the servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion, and loosed him, and forgave him the debt." So he was merciful to him. "But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence, which is a pittance compared to 10,000 talents. And he laid hands on him, and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet, and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And he would not." See, he said the same thing. This guy said to his Lord, "Have patience with me, I'll pay thee all." And his Lord had mercy, and then this guy that doesn't know him nearly as much, he asked the same thing, and he won't do it. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desiredst me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one